I'm pretty old, and when I was in college in the 90s, I remember that the first hi-fi system I listened to was at a friend's house. It was the Sony GR8. And you never quite forget your first hi-fi experience. And I'll never forget how that sounded. I think it was Euthanasia from Megadeth that had a guitar tone that I'd never quite heard like that before, searing and grating in the most wonderful way possible. So maybe I have a pro Sony bias based on my memories, and maybe that bias is going to play out in this video. But hey, after a near decade of reviewing earbuds, let's talk about the other Japanese giant that you guys wanted to see compared with the Sony WF-1000XM6.
The Technics AZ100 have been some of the best wireless earbuds on the market. You guys wanted to know which of these two is better. The interesting thing here is that the Technics, they've had some updates recently, and the microphone performance as well as the sound has changed by a lot. So let's do a quick comparison of the two and answer all those comments you guys have. If you're new to the channel, I'm Rohan.
And I'm Kevin.
We're DHRME, and we're usually technically in the same room, but for this one we're so near yet so far.
Alright, to prove that the sound has changed on the Technics, I'll show you some graphs. Don't worry, we're not going to get too technical, but this is just like objective proof that the sound has changed. This is a graph on the Technics when we last measured it in 2025, and with the latest update, this is the graph. See the difference? The older one has more bass and more treble, and the new tuning is flatter. Guess who else has gone flatter since last time? It's the Sony WF-1000XM6. Now, while the change on the Sony has been much more subtle, they've just shaved off a little of that bass. It lends to a cleaner and less bloated experience. But you guys aren't here to compare generations. You want to know which of these sound better, right? Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I like the stock tuning of the Sony. I'm just going to say it, guys. The stock tuning on the Technics AZ100, awful, veiled and over-smoothened. Those are like the words that come to mind. That does not mean it cannot sound good, but out of the box, I'm shocked that people can even use the default direct tuning. And that's one of the reasons that this video took longer. Another one is that I was cooking up a whole new set of songs to listen to. Also, guys, to be very upfront, I am not an audiophile despite what this hat might suggest, which is why those graphs that you saw, they help make things more objective. Now, again, let's first talk about stock sound for each of the songs and then see what we can do with EQ. For the first song, Hotel California, the Technics had a wider sound and a more punchy bass drum, but the higher treble was a bit spiky and the acoustic guitars, they felt less real compared to the Sony. Like, as somebody who's played guitar before, I know what a nice acoustic guitar sounds like. The vocals also sounded more upfront. So it's not a simple winner-loser kind of here. Do you like a wider, punchier sound or a narrower, more realistic timbre? I prefer the Sony. The next one is Chocolate Chip Trip from Tool. And this is all about 3D space and panning. And there are drums that go from the left of your head to the right of your head. Again, to me, the drums sound like the drums I've heard in real life when I use the Sony on a stock tuning. But the Technics, again, it's way wider and gives you more of a sense of space, even though the Techniques sound very, very good. However, for this song, since space is a big thing, I would say like I would enjoy it more on the Techniques. On Daft Punk's Contact, there's a part at the end that gets very busy and crowded and crazy. In the intro of the Apollo 17 sample for this song, I thought that the Sony brought the voice nicely to the forefront. Now, both these buds kind of struggle with the drums and they kind of go to mush over the electronic part. So I tried to listen for the snare and the kick drum definition. I think the Techniques tries to be less offensive here, whereas the Sony really gives you that annoying, irritating detail, which is more true to life. So I think it's a Sony for me on this one. Now again, all on stock tuning. Then I went to a sub bass test using Angel from Massive Attack. This track has a constant low bass line running with elements building up on top of it, like a distorted guitar line, layered vocals. And here I think that the bass and the sub bass are better delineated on the Techniques, which is a good test of bass quality. Then we have metal. That's what I'm all about. So Gojira's The Art of Dying and Opeth's Ghost of Perdition. Look, I've said it before. I'll say it again. The Techniques just do not work for me for metal. I'd rather pick a Sennheiser or a Sony or even an Oppo any day. There is some sort of smoothing of the attack that happens and I'm not a fan. But hey, this is the opinion of one guy with a specific kind of taste, with one specific set of ears, one specific set of memories. But there is a twist in the tale. I've been playing around with the Technics EQ for many, many hours, and I've finally found something that works. Almost maxing out the 1K, 2.5K and 4K bands, you're getting very good distortion. Again, it's like way better than the stock tuning. I really don't understand how people are using that. With the Technics, there's a little bit of a confusing thing in the EQ. The leftmost band is not a band, it just says bass. So I think it's kind of affecting the whole bass a little bit, or yeah, so the whole thing was a bit confusing. So it took me some time to get that thing. But again, for me and my old-timey heavy metal music and my old-timey ears, the Sonys are just so much better out of the box. Once you EQ them, things get much closer, and I dare say the Technics surpass the Sonys in some ways. But maybe at the end of the day, I would pick the Technics because I can tweak my sound and I like doing that. But props to the Sony for getting a great stock tuning. Again, this is not the best stock tuning in the world, but between the two, the Sony stock tuning wins.
All right, you guys wanted to know about the sound. Was that enough? There's one other major thing that both Technics and Sony have updated: the microphones for phone calls. Before we put these through their paces, let's talk about another important thing: the ANC and transparency. On noise cancelling, we've said before that both the Technics and Sony are in the same tier, Tier S. But there's Tier S and there's Tier S. The Sony clearly eliminates much more sound across the board. The low-end hum at about 70 to 75 dBA completely disappears, whereas while the Technics performs well, it isn't quite on Sony's level. Both also offer a ton of features around ANC, but the Sony outfeatures anyone else on the market. We could talk a lot more about it, but it's the Sony for noise cancelling clearly. And what about the opposite of active noise cancelling? Transparency. We'd say here that the Technics is closer to a nothing in your ear experience. Again, both are Tier S here, but the Technics lets in all the sound, including the low end, so it feels like you're really listening with your naked ears to the world. In fact, it probably even boosts all frequencies just a tiny bit, but not quite hearing aid levels of boosting. The Technics also has two modes, transparent and attention, which cuts out the low end. So if you're in a flight or in a bus, you can hear voices clearly while cancelling out engine sounds. Sony's transparency mode clearly boosts the mids and the highs, and even though it keeps some of the low end in, but it's not a natural experience. And Technics couldn't out-Sony in terms of features. Despite having a less natural experience, Sony can go even further with a voice pass-through, which is a less drastic version of Technics' attention mode. In the latest models, Sony has also added an auto ambient sound to automatically adjust the transparency level based on the sounds around you. One thing the Sony really excels at is the lack of white noise in ambient mode. With Technics, there's this mini waterfall that kind of runs the whole time when it's on max. But you can turn it down in the app to a lower level if that bothers you. The downside is that the awesome transparency also gets turned down. Technics has triple point, the ability to connect to 3 devices at once. No other brand gives you that. Sony has a solid, more traditional multi-point implementation with pull connect and a device list in the app.
Alright, so for those of you wondering what pull connection is, we have these two phones, the Samsung and the Oppo. Both are connected to the Technics right now, and the Technics are in dual point mode, so they can connect to 2 devices at once. But pull connection means I've paired this previously to this phone, and if I go to the menu, I can see Technics here. Watch what happens to the Samsung and the Oppo when I connect to the Technics. There you go. This one is now connected, the iPhone is connected, but the Samsung has been disconnected. And now the same thing with the Sony. You see that the Sony is connected to the Oppo and to the iPhone, but not to the Samsung. So I'm going to just select it from the menu here. And voila, it's connected to this, but disconnected from the iPhone. So if you have many devices like laptops, pull connection is a super handy feature which both of these buds support.
The Technics does drop your audio quality with every device you add though. And with 3 devices, you won't get LDAC support. Sony can do LDAC and multipoint. And let's not forget the thousands of features Sony offers in the app, which depending on who you are, is either overkill or great for personalizing these buds. And guys, we've railed on Sony for the comfort on the hybrid foam tips in the past, but the Technics have rounded silicone tips, which means you will also start feeling them in your ears after a while. They're not the most comfortable. In terms of microphone features, the biggest difference is that Technics offers much more controls in terms of phone calls. Answer, hang up, volume control, ANC mode, mute, all are available directly from the buds. The Sony struggle with good volume controls continues, and even though you can adjust the volume for your audio, you can't do it while on a call. Did we say that Sony had the most features? Well, we lied. Technics out-Sonyed Sony in the number of features for phone calls. It has a toggle to suppress sounds around you, but you can also suppress sounds of the other party calling you. And to be honest, we leave that second one off. Because so many phones and earbuds or headphones have noise suppression built in, it might just be a bit too much. And since a lot of you guys were complaining about us not doing microphone samples in real life conditions, Rowan went out in sub-zero temperatures to do a real life mic test. I think that deserves a like and a subscribe, don't you?
Guys, in terms of microphone performance, the Technique should never be used without noise suppression. At least that's my view. Unless your objective is to hear the surrounding noise and not the person talking. Here are a couple of samples with noise suppression turned off. AZ100 with the voice suppression off. Testing. Testing. The Technics AZ100 in breathing conditions, suppression off. Popsicle, ice, testing. 1, 2, 3. Right now, the Technics AZ100 with suppressed sounds around the disabled. I think there's going to be much worse. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Like we said, utterly useless with even a hint of noise or wind. So what happens when you enable the noise suppression? Here's a bunch of samples. The Technics AZ100 in breezy conditions with noise suppression enabled, so turned on. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Sony with windy, breezy conditions. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Right, we are picking up some wind as well as some traffic noises in the background here. And the Technics AZ100 has the suppressed noise on. Wow, it's really windy. Here we go. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. All right, now it's the Sony WF-1000XM6 in noisy conditions. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Well, both the Techniques and Sony do really well. But you heard the samples, we're not going to talk too much about that. What about a noisy cafe though? And now I have the Technics AZ100 with suppressed sound activated in a noisy cafe. How do I sound? Can you hear the background sound? There are glasses clinking near me. There are people talking. Popsicle. Ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Popsicle. Ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Alright, the Sony WF-1000XM6 in a super noisy cafe. People, kids, coffee machines, beer taps, everything going on around me. How do I sound? Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Popsicle, ice, icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Here we thought that the Sony was cleaner. Do you agree? Let us know in the comments down below. Rounding things out with the build and the design, we'd give this to the Technics again. The case isn't too much smaller than the Sony's, but when out and about with limited pocket space, the Technics are much easier to digest for your pocket. The Sony buds don't look bigger head-on, but are certainly fatter, and both are IP rated at IPX4, and the Technics, they come in 3 colors, while the Sony just in 2. The Technics does offer better battery life at 10 hours on the buds, whereas Sony offers just 8, but both are fine in our view. And both cases offer wireless charging as well.
Before we move to the conclusion, a huge thanks to all you guys, especially these folks on the tested tier, and a very big thanks to our highest tier, the Fuckman tier. Thanks Croxland, Brian, Radspanda, Paula, and Rachel.
In terms of price, these two are still pretty similar. It's quite interesting since the Technics has been around for a while now. But we've said before that for us, the Sonys aren't really as comfortable as many other buds out there because of those foam tips. So we'd pick the Technics just based on that. In addition, Technics offers better battery life, better call controls, a more pocketable case, and triple point. It's no wonder that these are a cult favorite. But I personally really dislike the stock tuning on the Technics. Did I say that? I think I did. Even after the update. However, if I was to spend my own money here, I'm sure Kevin would agree, it's clear we choose the Technics. However, if you're someone who wants a great sound straight out of the box and appreciates the foam tips, better ANC, better calls in noisy conditions, cleaner transparency, as well as all the features and the crazy customization that Sony offers, the Sony WF-1000XM6 might just be worth that little bit more.
If you want to see the Sony WF-1000XM6 compared to Bose's flagship, the QC Ultra Gen 2, click here.
And if you want something totally different on how IKEA is taking on Apple, click here. Dui.
Dewey.